You know that strange discomfort that shows up right when you should be feeling confident. You've done the work, you know what you're doing, and yet, the moment you step into a space where your skill is on display, something in you starts to pull back. Your voice gets quieter. Your movements become more self-conscious. You start explaining yourself too much or making jokes to soften what you just said. You almost apologize for being competent. It's not that you lack the ability, it's that the ability itself feels awkward to wear. Like a jacket that fits perfectly in the dressing room but suddenly feels too tight the moment someone else is in the room with you. This is a strange kind of discomfort because it doesn't show up when you're struggling. When you're learning something new, when you're fumbling your way through the early stages, there's a certain freedom in it. You're allowed to be clumsy. No one expects anything. But when you cross that invisible line into genuine competence, something shifts. Now there's a spotlight, even if it's just the one in your own mind. And instead of enjoying the mastery you've worked for, you find yourself shrinking, performing humility a little too hard, or staying quiet when you could actually contribute. Let's get specific about what this feels like. You're in a meeting, and someone asks a question that you know the answer to. Not just a vague familiarity, but deep knowing. You've spent years in this domain. You've made the mistakes, studied the nuances, developed the intuition. And yet, when you open your mouth, you hear yourself preface your answer with something like, "I could be wrong, but," or "this might not be helpful, but." You phrase your expertise as a guess. Later, someone else says the exact same thing with certainty, and they're praised for their insight. And you feel that familiar pinch. Not jealousy, exactly, more like confusion. Why couldn't you just own what you know? Or maybe it shows up in something more personal. You're naturally gifted at making people at ease. You've always been the one who knows how to hold space, how to ask the right question, how to make someone feel seen. But when someone compliments you on it, you feel a flash of embarrassment. You deflect. You say it's nothing, or you make a self-deprecating comment. You'd rather be seen as lucky than skilled, because luck doesn't come with expectations. Skill does. This pattern affects your identity in ways that go deeper than awkwardness. Over time, you start to believe that there's something inherently wrong with being good at something. You begin to associate competence with arrogance, or with being perceived as arrogant. So you police yourself constantly. You hold back in conversations. You downplay your accomplishments. You avoid situations where your expertise might be recognized. And slowly, you build a life that is slightly smaller than the one your abilities could support. What's happening here isn't a lack of skill. It's a conflict between skill and safety. And your brain, being the deeply pragmatic organ that it is, will always choose safety over expression if it believes expression is dangerous. Here's the reframe that matters. You are not broken. You are not secretly insecure in a way that can't be fixed. This awkwardness around your own competence is not a character flaw. It is an adaptation. At some point, your brain learned that visibility carries risk, and it learned this in the same way the brain learns everything else, through experience, repetition, and the quiet calculus of social survival. Think back to the earliest moments when being good at something made you uncomfortable. Maybe it was in a classroom, when you gave the right answer and felt the subtle shift in how other kids looked at you. Maybe it was in your family, where shining too brightly created tension, or where humility was the price of belonging. Maybe it was in a friendship where you learned that your strengths made others feel small, and so you learned to make yourself smaller in response. Your brain didn't decide to make you awkward, it decided to protect you. It saw that competence in your environment sometimes led to exclusion, resentment, or unwanted attention. And it built a strategy. When you're good at something, act like you're not. Stay safe. But now you're in a different environment, or at least you could be, and the strategy that once kept you safe is now keeping you silent. The protective mechanism has outlived its purpose, and the awkwardness you feel is the friction between who you are and who you learned to be to survive. So what's actually happening in your brain when this discomfort shows up?
There's a region called the anterior cingulate cortex, which acts as a kind of alarm system for social safety. It's constantly scanning for cues that you might be stepping out of line, violating a norm, or threatening your standing in a group. When you do something that makes you feel visible or exceptional, this alarm system can activate, especially if your past experiences have linked visibility with threat. It sends a signal to your amygdala, the brain's fear center, and suddenly you're flooded with a low-grade sense of unease. That unease is what you feel as awkwardness. At the same time, your brain's default mode network, the system that becomes active when you're self-reflective, kicks into overdrive. You start watching yourself from the outside. You become hyper-aware of how you might be perceived. This self-monitoring is useful in small doses, but when it's constant, it hijacks your ability to be present. You're no longer in the flow of the conversation or the task. You're in the audience, judging your own performance in real time. And here's the cruel irony. The more you monitor yourself, the more awkward you become, because you're splitting your attention between what you're doing and how you're being seen.
Think of it like walking across a narrow plank. If you just walk, your body knows what to do. Your balance is automatic. But if someone tells you to think about every step, to watch your feet, to analyze your posture, you suddenly become wobbly. Your skill hasn't changed. Your attention has. And that divided attention is what creates the awkwardness. There's a simple mental model that captures this. Imagine you have a map of a city you know intimately. You've walked these streets for years. You know the shortcuts, the rhythms, the hidden doorways. But now, imagine that every time you try to navigate from one place to another, someone holds a mirror in front of your face. You can't see the streets anymore. You can only see your own reflection. You're still the expert, but you're navigating blind because you're trapped in your own image. That's what happens when competence meets self-consciousness. The map is still there. You just can't see it because you're too busy looking at yourself. So how do you step back into your own expertise without the awkwardness? Not by trying to be more confident. Confidence isn't the opposite of awkwardness. Presence is. And presence is something you can build, not through force, but through a series of psychological shifts that retrain your brain to feel safe in your own competence. The first shift is to separate competence from performance. Your brain has collapsed these two things into one. It believes that being good at something means you must also perform that goodness in a way that is acceptable to others. But competence is simply the ability to do something well. Performance is the act of being seen doing it. You can be competent without performing. And when you practice doing something well while directing your attention away from how you appear, you start to break the association between skill and self-consciousness. So next time you're in a situation where you know what you're doing, try this. Shift your focus to the task itself, not to yourself doing the task. If you're giving advice, focus entirely on the person you're helping. If you're playing music, focus on the sound. If you're solving a problem, focus on the problem. Let your competence exist in the background, unobserved by your own inner critic. What you'll notice is that the awkwardness starts to fade, not because you've become more confident, but because you've become less self-referential. You've stopped holding the mirror. The second shift is to recalibrate your brain's social threat response by testing what actually happens when you own your competence. Your brain is operating on old data. It assumes that visibility leads to danger. But you can update this data through small, intentional experiments. Choose a low-stakes situation where you have genuine expertise, and instead of softening it, let it stand. Answer a question without the preface. Accept a compliment without the deflection. State your opinion without the disclaimer. And then, notice what happens. Not what you imagine will happen, but what actually happens. In most cases, the response will be neutral or positive. And when it's neutral or positive, your brain begins to collect new evidence. Over time, the alarm system quiets because it learns that competence in your current environment is not a threat. This is exposure therapy, a well-established principle in behavioral psychology. You don't have to do it all at once. You just have to do it enough times for your brain to update its map. The third shift is to give yourself permission to take up space. This sounds abstract, but it has a concrete psychological foundation. Your sense of what you're allowed to occupy is shaped by something called social baseline theory, which suggests that your brain calibrates your sense of safety based on the social environment you're in. If you've spent a lot of time in environments where competence was punished or envied, your brain lowered your baseline for how much space you're allowed to occupy. But you can raise it. Not by forcing yourself to be louder, but by deliberately choosing environments and relationships where your competence is welcomed. This is not about finding people who praise you. It's about finding spaces where your skill is met with curiosity rather than competition, with encouragement rather than envy. When you're in such a space, your brain's social baseline shifts. It begins to associate visibility with safety, and the awkwardness naturally recedes because your nervous system is no longer bracing for impact. The fourth shift is to understand the discomfort may not fully disappear, and that's okay. There's a concept in neuroscience called tolerance, which is distinct from elimination. You don't have to wait until the awkwardness is gone to act. You can act while the awkwardness is present, not fighting it, not trying to talk yourself out of it, but simply noticing it as a sensation that doesn't require your obedience. This is what acceptance and commitment therapy calls cognitive diffusion. You separate the thought from the instruction. You can feel awkward and still speak. You can feel the flush in your cheeks and still hold your ground. The awkwardness is not a command, it's just a feeling. And when you stop trying to eliminate it, you free up the energy you were using to fight it. That energy can now go back into what you're actually doing.
Now, bring all of this together into a single mental model. Imagine that your competence is a language you speak fluently. You learned it over years, but somewhere along the way, you also learned that speaking this language in front of others was dangerous. So, you developed an accent. You started to mumble. You added filler words. You spoke in ways that obscured your fluency. The awkwardness you feel is not a sign that you don't know the language. It's the strain of speaking in an accent that isn't yours. The work of reclaiming your competence is not learning to speak louder. It's dropping the accent. It's allowing your natural fluency to come through without the extra layer of performance designed to make you smaller. And the beautiful thing is that dropping the accent doesn't require you to become someone else. It requires you to stop becoming the person you were pretending to be. So, let this sit with you. The next time you feel that familiar awkwardness rising in the middle of something you know you're good at, recognize it for what it is. It is not a sign of inadequacy. It is the ghost of an old survival strategy. It is your brain trying to protect you from a threat that may no longer exist. You don't have to argue with it. You don't have to push it away. You simply have to stop letting it hold the pen. You can feel it and still speak. You can notice it and still share what you know. You can acknowledge it and still take up the space your skill deserves. And slowly, without forcing anything, the awkwardness begins to loosen its grip. Not because you defeated it, but because you stopped needing its protection. You are allowed to be good at what you're good at. Not for applause, not for recognition, just because it's true. And letting that truth exist, quietly and without apology, might be the most natural thing you've ever done.